all his personal things that he always wore.
Police wonder if the missing persons case could be a suicide.
He had just been laid off from his job. He was in a severe custody battle.
So I think, oh my God, maybe he got in his truck and ran it off a cliff.
Or had there been someone else with a motive to make him disappear?
This is going to come back to haunt you. You just wait. It's coming, sweetheart.
July 10th, 2003. 45-year-old Tim Schuster was due to meet a friend in the morning, but he never showed up for the appointment.
We were supposed to meet for breakfast. Went there, couldn't find him.
Tim is punctual. If he's going to be late, he calls you. So they started calling on the cell phone. They could not reach Tim.
By that afternoon, there was still no sign of Tim. Mary Solis and her husband Bob called police to Tim's house and waited as officers searched the premises.
I was scared for Tim, very scared for Tim.
Tim's friends had reason for concern. It was no secret that Tim and his wife ⴅ were in the midst of an acrimonious divorce.
No one would budge, and that certainly flared a lot of emotions, a lot of anger.
But the impending divorce wasn't all Tim had to worry about. He'd also recently lost his job. Had it all become too much?
He was laid off, and I thought maybe the poor guy just couldn't take it anymore. So I suspected suicide.
For answers, the investigators turned to Tim's estranged wife, ⴅ but the 43-year-old chemist seemed as baffled as the police.
Is he capable of just packing up, cashing out a bunch of money and going somewhere else thinking I need, maybe when you to snap and do that? Is he capable of doing that?
I don't know that I don't know.
You think you would leave your son and not see him?
My gut tells me that no, that he probably wouldn't do that.
Was ⴅ's gut instinct accurate, or had Tim become a man she no longer knew? Tim and ⴅ Schuster first met in 1982 at a hospital in Columbia, Missouri. Tim was a nurse, and ⴅ was working as an aide while she finished her degree in biochemistry at the University of Missouri.
One thing led to another, and they started dating and just decided to get married.
Things started well for the young couple. In 1985, they had a daughter, Kristen, and 4 years later, the family made a cross-country move to California. ⴅ, who was now an established biochemist, had been offered a research job with Pan Agricultural Labs outside Fresno, California.
It was a very lucrative job, so she basically moved her entire family out to California to make her career.
Tim took a job in the cardiac unit of Fresno's St. Agnes Medical Center. But it was ⴅ's paycheck that bought their big house in the Fresno suburbs.
See if there's anybody home.
Take your shoes off before you come in, please.
Yeah, that's a typical request. And I'm going to turn the tour over to the boss.
ⴅ was the lab manager. She had quite a large group under her.
And as in her relationship with Tim, ⴅ quickly established who was boss.
She could be very aggressive, put you in your place.
After her son was born in 1990, ⴅ also lorded over a growing family at home.
Mom was the disciplinarian, a very domineering parent. She had the upper hand.
In 1997, ⴅ decided to leave her job at Pan Ag to start her own lab.
ⴅ noticed that the business was starting to go downhill, so she decided to start her own, and she called it Central California Research Labs.
While ⴅ built her new business, it was up to Tim to fill the void at home.
ⴅ became more and more involved with her lab. Tim was basically forced to take over the role of Mr. Mom and just became basically the person who was in charge of running the household.
Tim held things together at home, but he struggled to meet ⴅ's increasingly demanding standards.
He was the puppet, and he did what he was told to do.
She was the one who wore the pants in the relationship. That was something that she made very clear.
Dad was kind of the soft teddy bear. He just kind of let it roll.
Larissa, of course, didn't. And that became a real problem when daughter Kristen became a teenager.
I was the normal teenager that rebelled, you know, did everything that she probably didn't want me to do.
Larissa responded by shipping Kristen off to Missouri.
Larissa decided that they needed to move their daughter back to Missouri, which is where Larissa's parents were living.
Tim, as usual, had little to do with the decision.
He knew that whatever he had to say, it wouldn't matter to her anyway, so it was almost better for him to just keep his mouth shut.
But Kristen's move added to the distance between Larissa and Tim. In the months that followed, the couple barely spoke.
They basically were two separate people going about their lives, living in the same house.
They were sleeping in separate rooms for quite a while, years, maybe longer.
In February 2002, Larissa filed for divorce.
She kept telling him she wanted him out. You know, he needed to get out.
Tim, for once, didn't do what he was told. Instead, he hired a lawyer and fought Larissa on everything from custody of their son to the division of the couple's assets.
She wanted full custody of my brother, and my dad wasn't going to have it.
He had a right to want some of the things that they had shared and built together. He finally decided he was going to stand up for himself.
One weekend in July of 2002, Tim took matters into his own hands. While Larissa was away visiting her daughter and parents in Missouri, he loaded up what he figured was his share of the property and left.
He moved into a condo. It was one of the first times that he decided to stand up for himself, take his own initiative, and to make a decision without Larissa's approval.
Larissa, returning home to a half-empty house, was furious.
I'll never forget that phone call that she made to me, you know, just every expletive, every name in the book.
She was so mad because he stood up to her. How dare you do that to me? Nobody crossed Larissa and nobody stood up to her.
You know, you're a real chicken shit, aren't you? You know, instead of coming in here and doing this while I was here and making this a little bit better, no, you had to tuck your f***ing tail. I want all of my grandmother's doilies, and I better, by God, see those mixing bowls.
But missing housewares weren't Larissa's only problem. Without Tim around to play Mr. Mom, she needed help looking after their 12-year-old son and turned to a 20-year-old, James Fagoni.
He was a lab technician at Larissa's laboratory. Very quiet to himself, rode a motorcycle. And I just always thought, you know, sweet kid.
In some ways, his personality is very similar to Tim's. He's passive, he's a shy guy.
And James, much like Tim, was more than willing to follow Larissa's lead.
Larissa needed someone to take care of her child quite often. So James would stay at Larissa's house for hours on end.
He was the errand boy for her, babysitting for my brother, picking him up from school events.
Some of James's errands went well beyond babysitting, though. One night, while Tim was out of town in August of 2002, James helped Larissa break into her husband's condo.
She explained to him the split and how he took this property and she needed to get it back.
Larissa didn't stop there, however.
Drawers were pulled out and emptied, baskets were just tossed.
She took a knife to the Ralph Lauren bedding.
She also told her friends all about it.
She said, I saw what I did and it just gave me this, she says, this orgasm that was better than sex.
I remember the excitement in her voice and how she was so pleased she got away with it.
Tim knew it was not a random break-in, but decided not to file charges.
He knew that she had done it, but my dad he wanted to let it go.
However, he was less forgiving when it came to the divorce. Moving out of the condo and into a house, he continued to contest every detail of the proceedings. And the more Tim fought, the more enraged Larissa became.
She would also not hesitate to call and yell and leave horrible, horrible messages on Tim's machine.
That's what you are. You couldn't even that dog. You're just an impotent, gay
Insults from his estranged wife weren't the only blows Tim's self-esteem took. In July of 2003, word came down from hospital management that layoffs were coming. Tim was on the list of those to be let go.
He's going through a horrendous divorce, horrendous custody issue. He's getting laid off.
Tim's friend ᴅᴏᴄᴜᴍᴇ was also losing her job. On July 10th, the co-workers were both scheduled to meet with the hospital's Human Resources Department to discuss their layoffs.
We were going to meet at 10 o'clock after his meeting. His meeting was first, he was going to let me know, okay, well, here's the kind of questions you need to ask.
But that morning, Tim never showed.
We were supposed to meet for breakfast. Went there, couldn't find him.
They started calling on the cell phone. They could not reach Tim. They called his home. They could not reach Tim.
Stranger still, when Mary went to her meeting with the HR representative later that morning, she discovered Tim had skipped his appointment.
The personnel person said, I guess Tim didn't want to talk.
Concerned about where Tim might be, Mary and Bob began calling Tim's friends. One of the first was Vic Uribe.
Bob says, can you go by the house and see if he's all right? Because they were trying to call him all day.
Vic immediately drove over to Tim's.
I went into the house through the side door in the garage, and I looked around.
There was no sign of Tim, and after a quick look around, Vic became worried.
The cell phone was on the dresser. He never went anywhere without that cell phone. That cell phone was with him 24/7.
Vic called us. And then I became not only concerned, I was scared for Tim.
A few minutes later, Bob and Mary met Vic at the house. On the way over, they contacted the police.
They came over, went through the house.
I didn't know if I was going to find somebody that just committed suicide. I didn't know if I was going to run into somebody that was despondent.
I was pretty scared. I didn't know what was going to happen when they came back out. I didn't know what they were going to find.
Coming up, police turned to Tim's estranged wife for answers. But would she cooperate?
Why did you feel the need not to tell us about that?
I shouldn't have, looking back now. I should have told you, but I don't know. It's a mistake.
On the afternoon of Thursday, July 10th, 2003, Clovis, California police entered the home of Tim Schuster. He'd been missing for almost 24 hours, and friends feared the worst.
He was going through a bitter divorce. He had just been laid off from his job. He was in a severe custody battle, and just not a lot of good things were going Tim's way.
But after a thorough search of the house, there was no sign of Tim, dead or alive. What the police did find, however, was little comfort for Tim's anxious friends.
The police found his wallet, his keys, his cell phone.
I knew something was wrong. I had a real bad feeling at that time.
On Friday morning, as soon as Tim had been missing for the required 24 hours, friends Bob and ᴅᴏᴜᴜᴜ filed an official missing persons report.
We thought maybe he went jogging, and got hit, by a car and was, somewhere. We didn't know.
We were looking for people that we could talk to help shed some light on perhaps what had happened to him or where he had gone.
One of the first calls was to Tim's estranged wife, Larissa. On Friday evening, police asked her to come down to the station to answer a few questions. Larissa told police she had little to give them.
She first told me it had been weeks since she'd called him.
Tim and I are going through divorce, and it's just been stretched out for a long time, and we've had a difficult time communicating verbally, so we don't do that. There's been times when we go for 3 weeks.
Larissa's statement was inconsistent with something investigators had found during the search of Tim's house.
On July 10th, there was a phone call at about 2 o'clock in the morning, and the phone number came back to being the cell phone number of Larissa Schuster.
Investigators gave Larissa another chance to tell them about the phone call they knew she'd made to Tim the morning he disappeared.
No phone calls or anything from him or anything in that time frame? No unusual activity? Or was there?
Not that I recall. I remember waking up on the couch and I had my cell phone and it looked like I might have hit a number or something.
But when the detectives asked to see her cell phone to verify that Tim's number was located on the speed dial, Larissa stalled.
You have your cell phone?
No, I don't. I don't have it here.
Where's your cell phone at?
I have it at home.
At home?
Yes.
When she told me that she had left her cell phone at home, I thought it was unusual because she had already told us that she had left her young son at home with a babysitter.
Calling a short break in the questioning, Detective Wybert walked outside to Larissa's car.
On the center console, I did see a cell phone sitting there. I went ahead and took my cell phone out, dialed her cell phone number, and the phone inside the car began to ring.
The detective stepped back into the station and asked Larissa to unlock her car.
Her demeanor, the way that she was acting, she became very nervous. Her voice was cracking. Her hands were shaking.
Back in the interrogation room, Detective Wybert leaned on Larissa. None of the speed dial settings were set to Tim's number.
2 is CCRL, that's your office. 3 is Larissa, that's your home. 4 we already tried.
Caught in a lie, Larissa admitted the truth.
Okay. I made the call.
Okay.
I was not sleeping well. I haven't slept well for a while.
Why did you feel the need not to tell us about that?
I don't know. Because I guess the call was so late at night, it seemed kind of a mistake.
Larissa knew the call looked bad, but according to what she told police, it didn't have anything to do with Tim's sudden disappearance.
Larissa, let me ask you this. Are you the type of person that could have anything to do with him missing?
No, not at all. No, I don't. I can't. I mean, we've had our problems and I dislike him and, you know, and we haven't been able to get along, but I couldn't do that to my son. I couldn't do that.
When the interview was over, detectives let Larissa go home. But when her friend Tammy Belshea called the next morning, Larissa was obviously rattled.
She felt that the phone was bugged. And so she said, I cannot talk about it. Can you come over here?
When Tammy arrived, Larissa explained that police suspected she had something to do with Tim's disappearance.
She calmly told me about what had happened, that they did ask her about specific calls that were made to Tim, where she was, what she was doing, and that sort of thing.
The next step, Tammy warned her friend, would be a search warrant.
Her response to me was, well, they can't do that. I'm going out of town on Sunday. They can't serve me.
Tammy tells Larissa, well, no, you don't understand. If they get a search warrant, then, you know, they can go in there without your permission.
I said, now, Larissa, they will go to your office and go through your things. They will do that at the house as well if there's reason to believe that they need to pursue that.
The statement provoked an odd reaction from Larissa.
She got up and I thought was very abrupt, said, Tammy, can you watch Tyler? I need to go to the lab and take care of some things. I got to do payroll and pay bills.
After Larissa's sudden departure, Tammy was alone in the house with Tyler.
I had plans in the afternoon, so I stressed to Larissa I could only watch Tyler until a certain time.
Several hours passed without any sign of Larissa. Tammy made repeated calls to her cell phone and office before Larissa finally picked up.
She says, oh, I've just been busy, I'm paying bills. You can go ahead and leave, Tyler will be fine. So I left and did not think anything more of it.
At least not until she arrived at work on Monday morning.
One of her chemists, Leslie, came into my office and she closed the door and she said, when Larissa was here and you were calling, did you know I was here as well?
The chemist, Leslie Dobbs, told Tammy she'd been working on Saturday when Larissa asked her a favor, to call the local U-Haul office and reserve a truck for that afternoon. Odder still, Leslie had been instructed to rent the truck in her name, not Larissa's.
I looked at Leslie and I encouraged her to go to the police department.
The police hadn't been idle since questioning Larissa on Friday evening. Tim's estranged wife was only the first person they'd contacted about his disappearance.
I started calling everybody that was in his contact list.
James ᴅᴏᴄ's name was on a Palm Pilot that was found in Tim Schuster's house. James had, on occasion, babysat Tyler. So police officers wanted to interview him.
Since James had worked with her in the lab, we knew that James and Larissa were friends to some degree.
On Monday, the police brought James in for questioning. During his interview, James confessed to breaking into Tim's condo a year earlier.
He said, yeah, I was with her and we went in and got some of her property back.
James also admitted that with Larissa's encouragement, he'd helped himself to some of Tim's property.
She basically told James that in exchange for you helping me, you can take some of the electronics, the TV, stereo equipment, etc.
That afternoon, the police let James go. They had more important things to investigate than a year-old burglary. Larissa, based on what James told them, wouldn't hesitate to break the law to get back at her husband.
More was going on here than Tim just being missing. We began to look at this as potentially a homicide.
Coming up, would Larissa really go as far as committing homicide? Or was murder merely the beginning?
It just didn't look real. You know, it looked like something for a horror film.
On Monday, July 14, 2003, Tim Schuster had been missing for 5 days. His friends who had filed a missing persons report with Clovis, California police feared the worst.
I said, look, we feel that our friend might be in danger or has hurt himself.
We didn't know. It was kind of sitting in limbo for a week.
If Tim's estranged wife, Larissa, was worried, it didn't stop her from taking a planned vacation.
She had planned this vacation for many weeks, and so she decided to go ahead and take this because it was very important for her to share that experience with Tyler.
But was a vacation all Larissa had been planning? Clovis, California police weren't so sure. Late Monday afternoon, they'd received an intriguing tip from Leslie Dobbs, a chemist who worked at Larissa's lab. On Saturday, July 12th, Larissa had asked Leslie to rent a U-Haul truck for her.
She did, in fact, rent a U-Haul truck for Larissa. Larissa then took the U-Haul truck and was gone for a period of time.
Where had Larissa gone? Leslie thought she knew.
She told police that Larissa had rented a storage unit, and she wasn't really sure what was going on.
The police were determined to find out. That afternoon, they sent an officer to check out the storage unit. Even from the parking lot, their suspicions were confirmed.
When the detective got on scene, he exited his vehicle and noticed a strong odor. As he got out of his car, he recognized that odor as the odor of decaying flesh.
When the officer opened the storage unit, the source of the odor was apparent. Partially hidden in the back of the room was a blue 55-gallon barrel. Police had a strong suspicion about what was inside.
We secured that location, held on to it. We wrote a search warrant for it and served that search warrant.
Detective Jim Cook helped conduct the search.
I stopped by the fire department and picked up a breathing apparatus. We had some concerns because of her history of chemical knowledge and her line of work. We weren't sure what we were going to find.
But other than the breathing apparatus, there was little to prepare detectives for what they did find.
Once the barrel was open and I looked inside, you could only see a portion of the body submerged in some sort of a fluid.
And they could only see a portion because that was all there was.
The whole complete upper portion was gone. It had just been dissolved.
And the fluid inside the barrel was a toxic stew of hydrochloric acid and the liquefied remains of what police suspected had been Timothy Schuster.
It looked like something for a horror film.
DNA analysis would be needed to establish the corpse's identity.
50% of him was totally dissolved.
The barrel was transported to the coroner's office. Holes were drilled to drain the fluid, and the grisly autopsy began.
The acid smell is just horrendous. They evacuated the whole building.
In addition to the acid, lab analysis of the remains revealed the presence of another chemical, chloroform, which could have contributed to Tim's death.
I left the cause of death as a probable acute chloroform exposure and hydrochloric acid immersion.
On July 15th, several Clovis police officers boarded a plane to Missouri, where Larissa was heading on the second leg of her vacation.
She had a planned vacation with her son, and we were aware of where she was going.
That same afternoon, investigators also brought in James Fagoni for another talk. And this time, James told police about another trip he'd taken with Larissa to Tim Schuster's home. Only this time, according to James, what Larissa had in mind wasn't just a burglary.
It was this time we're going to teach him a lesson.
They went there with zip ties. He went there with chloroform. He went there with a stun gun.
To get Tim to open his front door, James said Larissa called Tim and told him their son was ill.
Which was the phone call that was received at 0202 hours in the morning from Larissa's cell phone.
He opened the door and stunned him and took him down, and then she bound him, and then, before I know it, I couldn't tell if he was alive or not.
James said they dragged Tim into the back of his truck and drove him to Larissa's house. That's where, according to James, they'd put Tim in the barrel, head first.
James told me that at that point, Larissa began grabbing glass bottles and pouring liquid into the barrel on top of Tim's body. I asked him what those bottles were, and he said that he wasn't certain, but he believed that they were acid.
And how many got poured in?
I think she did 1 or 2 or 3, and then she couldn't handle it anymore.
And how many did you pour after that?
I didn't pour.
James claimed the barrel remained hidden in Larissa's tool shed overnight. Then, after police questioned her about Tim's disappearance, Larissa had panicked.
He told me that she said, "I can't leave him in the shed, you have to help me."
According to James, they moved the body to the lab and added more acid. Then, after Tammy Belche's visit on Saturday, James said he'd received another nervous phone call from Larissa. Informing him that it was time to move the body again, she asked James to rent a U-Haul. James said he'd refused.
She was saying, get a friend to rent a truck or whatever, and I didn't want to. I wasn't going to. I didn't want to get pulled in any further. It was terrible enough as it is.
There was no plan to kill Timothy Schuster. There was never any discussion of killing Timothy Schuster.
The police saw things differently. When the interrogation was over, they placed James under arrest and charged him with murder in the first degree.
I don't think James Fagoni intended to kill Tim Schuster. What we did know is that he planned to stun him with a stun gun and rob him. Something along those lines took place, and somehow Mr. Schuster died.
By that afternoon, word of the arrest and the grisly discovery that led to it was all over the local news.
We just heard on the news that they had discovered the barrel and the contents of the barrel, and I just remember screaming, "Oh no."
Not long after, the news reached Missouri. Larissa's daughter Kristen, expecting a visit from her mother, instead received word of her father's death.
I just broke out in tears. You go from, okay, my dad's missing, but I want to think he's okay, to, okay, my dad was found in pieces.
On Wednesday morning, July 16th, police were waiting when Lerissa stepped off a plane at the St. Louis airport.
But at no point did she ask, what happened to Tim? At no point did she ask, how did he die?
Transported back to California, Lerissa was also charged with first-degree murder. Unlike James, she refused to talk.
Detectives had intended to go ahead and interview her regarding the crime and try and get a statement from her. However, she chose to wish to speak to an attorney.
Therefore, to build their case against Lerissa, investigators had to take James's statement as a starting point.
Not only did he confess, but he confessed with details that could be corroborated.
With James's cooperation, police spent the next several days compiling evidence.
He told us that he had thrown a stun gun into a porta potty on the outskirts of town. I asked him to draw me a map. Armed with that information, we were eventually able to fish out that stun gun.
They found a bottle in James' bedroom, and he voluntarily said, oh, that contained the chloroform.
At Larissa's lab, police seized computers and business files and searched the premises.
They located 6 empty acid bottles in the dumpster outside of the lab.
Also in the lab were receipts for 18 2-liter bottles of hydrochloric acid and an acid-resistant 55-gallon barrel.
Talking to the employees, that's not anything that was ever ordered before, was not needed for any test that the company was running.
Since her lab started, she had never had the need for more than really 1 or 2 gallons of hydrochloric acid each year.
Typically, according to lab employees, the acid was used to clean test tubes. But information found on Larissa's computer led police to believe she'd ordered it with something else in mind.
She conducted a series of Google searches, and she looked up the words acid, digestion, and animal tissue.
Finally, using Lerissa and James's cell phone records and the storage company's logs, police retraced Larissa's steps over the course of the last 5 days. What they found largely confirmed James's confession.
What he told us tied in perfectly with the cell phone call that we found in her cell phone records. It tied in perfectly with the property that we had discovered during the search. It tied in perfectly with the barrel that the body was discovered in.
And while Clovis police collected the evidence, prosecutors went to work on James.
It was anticipated some plea agreement would be reached with James ʟᴜᴜ to have him testify in this case.
But when James refused to make a deal, the DA had little choice but to proceed with prosecution.
California, if you commit a murder while also committing the crime of robbery or residential burglary, then you have the potential of facing a death penalty or life in prison without the possibility of parole.
James stood trial in November of 2006, well before Larissa's scheduled court date.
James' case was an easier case to prosecute than Larissa's because he confessed.
Of course, James had only confessed to helping rob Tim Schuster, not killing him. But that detail could mean he was guilty of committing a felony murder. It would be up to the jury to decide.
We, the jury in the above entitled action, find the defendant, James ʟᴜᴜ, guilty of first-degree murder of Timothy Schuster.
The verdict was guilty of first-degree murder with the special circumstance of during the commission of a burglary. He was sentenced ultimately to life without the possibility of parole.
Coming up, Lerissa gets her day in court.
Did you kill your husband?
No, I did not kill my husband.
When Lerissa Schuster filed for divorce in February of 2002, her husband Tim had hired a lawyer and fought every step of the way. But the bitter legal battle ended in July of 2003 when Tim Schuster's semi-dissolved body was found stuffed inside a barrel of acid.
5 or 6 months later, we finally got a DNA positive ID on him. After a couple of tries, we were able to send in a sample that that the DNA lab could use.
I really started thinking about who could have really done this, and then when they arrested her, everything started to click.
Charged with her husband's murder, ⴅᴜsᴜ stood trial in October of 2007 in a case that had sparked a media frenzy.
Given that publicity, there was a motion for change of venue. Judge Ellison granted that, and we moved the case to Los Angeles.
The change of venue wasn't the only thing working to ⴅᴜsᴜ's advantage when she walked into an LA courtroom on October 22nd. Alleged co-conspirator James Fagone, already convicted for his role in the crime, wasn't on the prosecution's witness list.
We just couldn't reach a mutually agreeable sort of plea agreement that would allow him to testify against ⴅᴜsᴜ.
James's testimony wasn't all the prosecutors lacked either. The judge, since James wouldn't take the stand, had ruled James's police interrogation video and any mention of it off limits.
A person has a right to confront and cross-examine any evidence or witnesses or statements made against them. And that could only occur if James testified.
In his opening statement on October 22nd, prosecutor Dennis Peterson laid out a case that relied entirely on circumstantial evidence.
The circumstantial case involved a substantial number of witnesses and a lot of pieces to this puzzle.
And while prosecutors didn't have an eyewitness to the murder, they did call several to testify about ⴅᴜsᴜ's threats to kill Tim. Friend and manicurist Terry Lopez testified on October 24th.
And she said, "I will see him dead before he touches a penny of my money." And she just looked at me and she said, "And don't think I won't."
To back up Terry's testimony, prosecutors turned to ⴅᴜsᴜ herself. On October 25th, they played tapes of the messages she'd left on Tim's voicemail.
"You're such a wimp, you have no spine, and you're a f***ed. That's what you are, a f***ed. I hate your f***ing guts so bad I can't even stand you. I hope you burn in hell."
But did ⴅᴜsᴜ's venom mean she killed Tim and attempted to destroy his body with acid? On November 2nd, Tammy Belshea took the stand and testified about ⴅᴜsᴜ's Saturday trip to the office, the one where she'd supposedly paid some bills.
The prosecution really wanted me to summarize that Saturday, what I suggested to her and what our discussions were and how she abruptly left and what I think they felt was the whole domino effect that led her to do other, cleanup type items.
Then the prosecution laid out all those dominoes one by one. The computer searches researching how to dispose of a body with acid, the truck rental, and the receipts recovered from her business.
The evidence plainly spoke to the fact that she's the one who personally ordered these enormous quantities of acid. She's the one who personally ordered that open-top barrel.
But the defense, when they started presenting their case on November 6th, argued that none of that evidence directly connected ⴅᴜsᴜ to Tim's murder.
There was no forensic physical evidence produced that would suggest that ⴅᴜsᴜ was ever in his home such that she would have been in a position to bring harm to him.
And even though James Fagone's testimony was not allowed in ⴅᴜsᴜ's trial, his conviction was.
The defense theory was that James was acting on his own.
But if James had killed Tim, what was ⴅᴜsᴜ doing on Saturday with the U-Haul? On November 14th, ⴅᴜsᴜ took the stand in her own defense. Step 1, pin Tim's death squarely on James.
She said that on Friday night, right after she had gotten back from her interview with police, she goes back to her house where James was babysitting her son. And James, in some type of frantic state, tells her, something happened to Tim.
She only found out after the fact that he was dead and that his body was inside of a barrel.
Then ⴅᴜsᴜ testified that she panicked and told James to get rid of the body.
She knew based on all the things that she had said about her estranged husband, that she would be the one suspected of killing him.
She decided that instead of calling police, she was going to help James dispose of the body.
According to Larissa, that's why she'd spent Saturday scrambling to rent the U-Haul and move the barrel to the storage unit.
There was this substantial body of really compelling circumstantial evidence against her. And her explanation, of course, is that she was just assisting after the fact. She had nothing to do with the actual planning or murder of her husband.
And that was only the beginning of Larissa's lengthy explanation.
The barrel was actually shipped inadvertently, and we were able to show that that's not exactly what was ordered. But it came, she hung on to it, and she was ultimately going to take it home and use it around the house.
And the massive order of acid? It was true that Larissa's lab had never needed so much before.
She had planned for some time the wholesale cleaning of all of her glassware.
Methodically, like the scientist she was, Larissa attempted to explain away every piece of the prosecution's circumstantial evidence.
She was very calm. She had an answer for everything.
Unflappable is probably a pretty good description. She never flinched.
Did you kill your husband?
No, I did not kill my husband.
On December 10th of 2007, the jury retired to determine a verdict in the case of Larissa Schuster. The chemist prosecutors claimed had ended her bitter divorce by killing her husband with acid.
A biochemist who's accused of killing her husband in the very way that she works. From the get-go, a lot of people felt she was guilty.
Would the jury? According to Larissa's attorney, the prosecution's entire case was a very unscientific pile of circumstantial evidence.
They were unable to place her in any context that would fit within his disappearance and killing.
At noon on December 12th, the jury returned with its verdict.
The verdict was guilty of first-degree murder and a finding of that the murder was committed for financial gain.
At Larissa's sentencing, her daughter Kristen stood up and made a passionate victim's impact statement.
My heart has been broken, ripped out of my chest, stomped on, and then beat to a pulp. May your present and next life be filled with as much pain as you inflicted upon my father. Maybe later in life I can learn to forgive you, but I highly doubt it. So this is goodbye. Not just for now, but for good. This is goodbye as your daughter. I don't know if I will ever forgive her. I might, but I can't tell you that today.
The judge certainly wasn't in a forgiving mood. On May 16, 2008, he sentenced Larissa to life without parole.
She's going to live in a very small room with none of the luxuries that she's used to and nothing left. So the things that she wished for him, she's actually gotten for herself.